Good afternoon. Please continue to enjoy your lunch as we begin our presentation. I got to tell you, I am so excited to be here today. We have essentially a hometown girl who has made it to the big time as we talk about her in the offices of the John Locke Foundation. Delighted that we're going to be able to have her with us today, along with her co-author, Guy Benson. I'm Donna Martinez. I'm Vice President for Marketing and Communications for the John Locke Foundation, an organization dedicated to making North Carolina first in freedom. At your place setting, you have a small brochure that we hope that if you haven't already taken a look at this, that you will spend a minute looking at this. This is something that we believe really represents the opportunity and possibility of North Carolina. Our research folks have done an incredible job taking a look at different areas of public policy and rating North Carolina, comparing North Carolina to other states in the country, and essentially coming up with an index of freedom. Overall, we have determined that North Carolina ranks 23rd. So we think that's okay, but we know we can do so much better. And we know by following what's happening in the state legislature that we have much opportunity there. There are reformers in place who are doing everything they can. We are helping them to understand the impact of economic policy and other things that they're considering as to whether that will enhance freedom in North Carolina or whether their decisions will inhibit freedom. It is our hope and our goal that each year we will be coming up with an update on our Freedom Index. And of course, with your support, it is our goal that we will indeed, over the next several years, move North Carolina to its rightful place, first in freedom. We thank you for your support, and in fact, a special thank you and welcome to the members of our Freedom Club that are here with us today. So today, we are really going to be treated to what I already understand is not only an interesting discussion, but a funny one, from the co-authors of the book, End of Discussion, Mary Katharine Ham and Guy Benson. We are going to be live tweeting this event, as we are now knee-deep in social media, as many people are. To give you just a quick update on how you can be a part of our live tweeting, I'd like to introduce to you Carrie Travis with John Locke Foundation. She is our social media expert. Carrie?
Thank you. So speaking of discussion, we are going to be live tweeting today, and what that means is I'll be over there in the corner, kind of hearing snippets, sound bites, putting those out on Twitter. And what you all can do is first you can follow us on Twitter if you happen to have a Twitter account. Our handle is @, John Locke NC. John Locke spelled exactly the way you'd expect, the letters NC. And our hashtag, for those of you who use hashtags and follow that, is JLF events. That's capital J, capital L, capital F, lowercase word events. And so we really hope that you'll follow us there and engage in the conversation. And the other thing we'd love for you to do is to find Carolina Journal on Twitter as well. We're very active, giving our news updates, our story updates on there, and that's @ Carolina Journal on Twitter. So please follow us. Please retweet, please tweet at us. We love to hear your comments. And we're also on Facebook. For those of you who have Facebook accounts, we also give updates about events, about news stories. So that's John Locke Foundation is where you can find us on Facebook, and Carolina Journal is our other Facebook name. So thank you, and we hope to hear from you on social media.
Thank you, Carrie, very much. One quick reminder, each of you has at your chair our interest sheet. What we'd like you to do is, even if you are a regular supporter and attendee at our events, we just want to make sure that we have all the right information and that we know specifically what you're interested in. Let us know. We will update the information we have on you and make sure that you have all the updates that you want on the issues that you care about as we work through those at the Locke Foundation. Also, what we have done over the past 25 years in this organization, in many cases with the support of all of you, by coming to events and by supporting us financially, we've earned ourselves a reputation that we're very proud of. A reputation for solid research, which we know that legislators and the governor's office rely on to make their decisions. We know that part of our reputation is for rigorous journalism, And we're very proud of that as well. 25 years of serving North Carolina. And because of that reputation, a lot of people are talking about the John Locke Foundation. And today we'd like to give you a sense of who some of those folks are.
When I first think about the John Locke Foundation, the first thing that comes to mind is the fact that for 25 years, they have been effectively representing freedom, liberty, and the best interests of the American people.
Newspapers are fading, and investigative reporting has been fading with it, but not in North Carolina because of the John Locke Foundation.
As a reporter, when I want to find out what's going on in North Carolina, I look to the John Locke Foundation.
People know that the John Locke Foundation is the gold standard of state-based think tanks.
Anyone who's interested in policy needs facts to back up what they advocate. We all have feelings, but you actually need to have something to ground that in. And so a place like the John Locke Foundation can offer that.
John Locke himself once said, "The improvement of understanding is for two ends. First, our own increase of knowledge. Secondly, to enable us to deliver that knowledge to others, something well demonstrated by the John Locke Foundation's mission."
You know, what's important to remember about the John Locke Foundation is the vision that Art Pope had 25 years ago, to have a conservative state think tank that does solid research and has an impact on the state politically and in other ways as well.
Without the John Locke Foundation, a lot of the positive changes that have come about in North Carolina simply would not have been thought of, would never have happened.
It's helped North Carolina emerge as a more conservative state than most people expected.
Its focus on developing a much better understanding of free enterprise, of the importance of the family, of the key role that community plays. It's really central both to the better, healthy development of North Carolina, but frankly to conservatives all over America.
In a free society, if you want people to change the direction of their government, you need to give them reasons. And the John Locke Foundation gives people facts and reasons and arguments and turns every citizen into somebody making progress for liberty.
Congratulations.
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 Congratulations
To the John Locke Foundation on 25 years.
On your 25th anniversary
Of a whole quarter of a century doing good work.
of leadership.
Of helping make America better.
Here's to 25 more.
And again, thank you to all of you for the role that you've played, and we hope you will continue to play in the next quarter century of the history and impact of the John Locke Foundation. And in fact, I wanted to mention one of the people in that video that you saw, of course, is one of our speakers today, but another person, Fred Barnes, is actually going to be with us, and so you're going to want to make your reservations for that headliner luncheon. Mr. Barnes will be with us on October 14th, talking about a book that he's written about Jack Kemp. Hope you can join us for that. One of the key folks who has helped to create our reputation over 25 years is the publisher of Carolina Journal. His name is John Hamm. Many of you see his work in Carolina Journal, and we, of course, see him every day around the office. He spent 4 decades in journalism, and he spent a long time in this community as well. For a very long time, he was the managing editor of the Herald-Sun of Durham. But today, John is doing double duty. Not only is he here representing Carolina Journal as its publisher, he's here as a proud papa, because John Hamm is the father of one of our guests today, Mary Katharine Hamm. To introduce our guest, Mary Katharine, and her co-author, Guy Benson, please welcome publisher of Carolina Journal, John Hamm.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I explained to Guy earlier that the reason that Mary Katharine was on the advertising and Guy is not is that when we first set this up, we thought he had a conflict. So no reflection on you, Guy. So you're getting more for your money today. It gives me pleasure to introduce these two people who introduced her recently at a book talk I went to, called them Rising Stars of Conservative Punditry. Well, I've known one of them all my life, and I've known Guy for a few years. I think we met at Mary Katharine's wedding. Guy is the political editor of townhall.com. He's a Fox News contributor, and he hosts his own radio show that airs in Chicago and Washington, D.C. He's a graduate of the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern, And he went to middle school and high school in Ridgewood, New Jersey, and strangely enough, we have somebody at our table who lived in that same community and whose children went to the same schools. He spent most of his childhood overseas, or early childhood, due to his father's work. He was born in Saudi Arabia, and he's imparted to me several interesting comments about what happens when people at borders see that a 20s to early 30s something person was born in Saudi Arabia. It can provide some interesting moments with TSA. Mary Katharine, my daughter, was born in Montgomery, Alabama, raised in Durham when we moved there when I went to Duke Graduate School. She attended the University of Georgia's Henry W. Grady School of Journalism, as I did. I'm not sure that's why she went there, but we both attended the same school. She spent 2 years covering everything from local government, high school football, and NASCAR at the Richmond County Journal in Rockingham. Then she moved on to edit the Insider magazine at Heritage Foundation, which is how she ended up in Washington. She's now contributing editor of hotair.com and is also, as Guy is, a Fox News contributor. In the last month, or well, a couple of months really, since June 9th when the book was released, I'm amazed at the amount of energy it takes to promote a book. It's also amazing to me that she and Guy wrote this book while she had a brand new daughter during the year that they spent writing this book, and she's promoting it while expecting our second grandchild. And so since June 9th, they've been on the road constantly. I mean, I know their schedule, and it's you can't even keep up with it. You know, we try to do it on Twitter and Facebook, but it's hard to do. Somebody at the table asked me how they met. Mary Katharine and Guy have been doing radio together for some years. Hugh Hewitt, whom some of you might know, is a West Coast talk show host, and he's had them on his show for some years as the Young Guns. They just young conservatives. And now when Hugh goes on vacation, Guy and Mary Katharine take over his show for a week and do that from Los Angeles. And they've both done radio. Guy, as I said, has been doing radio since high school. And Mary Katharine was on a radio show in Washington, D.C. for a couple of years, morning drive, until she decided she didn't like getting up at 3 in the morning. So they've worked together for a while, and then some time ago they started seeing these incidents of these outrage of the week and then outrage of the month, and every time one would sort of fizzle, another one would pop up, and they started talking about that. A good example of a recent one is Cecil the Lion. That's these things just keep coming up, and so they finally said, well, let's write a book about this kind of thing, because it occurred to them that these outrages didn't come up to try to promote discussion of a serious issue. They came up to try to get the other side to shut up. And so that's why they wrote End of Discussion. And so it's with a great pleasure I introduce to you Guy Benson and Mary Katharine Ham, authors of End of Discussion.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. It's lovely to be back in town. My mom is at home, couldn't be with us today because I have given my daughter to her for the day. She will turn 2 tomorrow. Very exciting time in the Ham family. And if you ask her, how old are you, Georgia? She'll say, 2. Because she knows she should put her fingers up, but she doesn't know how many fingers. She also doesn't quite realize that she's not already 2. So in both hedging the truth and not understanding numbers, she's very similar to a liberal North Carolina legislator. Yeah. She's got a great future, that one. So it is lovely to be back in North Carolina, and especially to talk about the subject of our book, End of Discussion, because as the home of Moral Mondays, you may be familiar with a bunch of liberals bankrolled by a bunch of rich people and pretending to be grassroots, hanging out in your state capital and making it Wisconsin on the East Coast, and pretending to be mad about every single thing that ever happens every single day. You guys are pretty familiar with this phenomenon, but Guy and I wanted to elucidate how these things happen, and I know the Locke Foundation has done great work on that as well. In fact, when brushing up on my Moral Monday research before we came out here today, I was referring to John Locke Foundation research on education funding because one of the reasons that Moral Mondays were so angry was that education research was, of course, being slashed in huge, huge numbers. But real quick, and Guy, this is for your edification as well, because I'm sure you've heard about how North Carolina cares not a bit about education.
Oh, it's outrageous.
Yes. This is PolitiFact. So, you know, if not accurate, it's certainly left of center, not interested in backing us. When we looked at North Carolina's education budget year to year, it has increased every year since Tom Tillis became Speaker in 2011. PolitiFact, of course, found the charge half true even so. But this is the phenomenon that we wanted to talk about and to illustrate to people in writing End of Discussion. And as my dad said, Guy and I have been friends for many years and have seen this phenomenon build and thought, hey, perhaps if we expose it, we can convince some people that this isn't how we should be operating. This isn't how we should be having debates.
And by the way, when we were discussing what we wanted to talk about today, we were like, well, maybe this could be sort of like a Moral Monday event, just fun and coherent. Right? So that's what we're shooting for. So let us know afterwards how we do. And by just one personal note, it is very exciting and still sort of off the record that Mary Katharine is pregnant again. And I found out just before we left for this whole long book tour. So I was so excited. Oh, we're going to hang out all over the country. And then she's like, so I can't drink. It's like, well, I'll have to drink for 3. I'm drinking for 3, guys. So I haven't started yet today, but I will eventually. Yes. But yeah, so what we really wanted to get into in End of Discussion was how the left in particular, overwhelmingly, not exclusively, the right does this a little bit, but how the left in particular is increasingly trying to win political debates and cultural debates by preventing the debate from happening. They don't want to engage our ideas on a level playing field. They want to eject us from the playing field altogether, right? It's about delegitimization, disqualification, demonizing, rather than grappling with actual ideas, because if they can make the argument that their opposition is de facto bad or evil by impugning their motives and feigning outrage, that sort of is a get-out-of-jail-free card. They're off the hook for any rational discussion, which in many cases is harder, right? It's more of a challenge to actually win on the merits, so they don't want to. They want to take these sort of emotionalist shortcuts by casting the opposition as just straight up, on its face, wrong, bad, unworthy of discussion, unworthy of tolerance. And so we thought this was a toxic environment. We hope to write and think and speak about important issues for many decades to come, God willing, in this country. And the direction that we seem to be headed was troubling to us, which is why we sort of finally got off of our rear ends and wrote this book.
Well, and a lot of this phenomenon is not just about outrage, but about acting outraged. One of the things we talk about in the discussion is perhaps one of the reasons that soccer has not caught on in the United States at quite the level that it has in Europe is because of something called the flop, which is when a soccer player falls to the ground writhing and crying, grown men writhing and crying and grabbing their shins because they've been fouled, looking for that yellow card, looking for that red card, and the ref runs by and is like, nah, not gonna happen. And the guy pops back up and plays ball because there was nothing wrong with him. This, of course, happens in other sports, but soccer specializes in this. And we argue that our culture in things big and small, all up and down the line, is becoming a culture of cultural floppers. We're like, oh my gosh, I have been offended by this. You must be fired. You must apologize. And unfortunately, the refs, which is usually the media, are far too willing to give credence to this flopping, especially if it's on the left. And so we're all forced to pretend that everything is a giant outrage when really everyone should just chill out every now and then. A perfect example happened in Chapel Hill, capital of sanity, a couple years ago in a college town.
Wait for it. It's going to be really scandalous. In a college town, there was a bar where they were playing top 40 music. And at the bar, the DJ played a song called Blurred Lines. Guy, you love this song.
I actually hate this song. We wasted valuable writing time arguing about the merits of this song. I think it is repetitive and interminable. Oh, and awful. She likes it for some reason. Anyway, it was the #1 song in America. So I was in the minority on this one. #1 song in America that this DJ played on a Friday night at this bar in Chapel Hill. And there was a young woman who was there with her friends, and she didn't like some of the lyrics in the song. And they're a little bit sexually suggestive, a little aggressive at certain points, but she marched up to the DJ and insisted that he turn off the song immediately because somebody might get triggered by the song. So
she wasn't triggered, mind you. Someone might be.
Someone might get triggered. And keep that, if you're like, what is this triggering you speak of? Hold that thought. We'll be back to that in a second. But she was like, this is triggering. This is triggering. Turn this off immediately. And she's just like, no. It's #1 song in America. Just go have a beer. She marches off in a huff, goes back to her dorm, gets her buddies together, and they get a petition going that says that the bar is creating a rape culture environment that basically is pro-rape because he played this song, and they delivered this petition to the bar, which freaked out, because if you're the manager of a college bar, like the last thing you want to have associated with your business is rape culture. You're like, ugh. So they freaked out and just fired the DJ. So
lost his job.
Never play the song again, and he is dismissed from our service. This is a DJ fired for playing the #1 hit in America because rape culture accusations from a tiny sliver of people.
Not even hardly even a sliver. A sliver of people who thought it might be offensive. Not a sliver of people who thought it was actually offensive. It's remarkable how little it takes to get us to fold. And that's one of the themes of End of Discussion, is that the way to avoid some of this is to hold strong when you've done nothing wrong. We lift up one of our heroes, Joan Rivers, because the beauty of Joan Rivers was when someone came to her and said, "You have offended me with your joke," she would say, "I don't care. I'm a comedian. Welcome to comedy." And the beauty of that is, and the power of that, is that when they would come to her and say, "You've offended us with your joke, you must apologize," she would say, "No, I will not apologize." And then they would go, well, now we don't know what to do. Because the next story is supposed to be about how Joan Rivers apologized, and then the next story is supposed to be about how activists would not accept Joan Rivers' apology. And Joan Rivers didn't give them the next story. So they would move on to the next victim who would.
See, we kind of thought that when she passed away, we were actually hot on the trail to get an interview with her for End of Discussion, and then she died, which was just so rude of her.
I know.
It's like, we've got a book coming out, Joan, and she would not
be... A joke that Joan would appreciate.
Yeah, she would not be offended by that joke. And we were talking about how her tombstone could have just been a giant granite middle finger.
Tastefully carved.
Yeah, it would have been a beautiful, luxurious middle finger tombstone. But yeah, that's sometimes what you have to do. You have to remember, like, these people represent a tiny little subgroup. They're very loud, they're coordinated, but they don't really represent really all that many people on this triggering thing. So a lot of this madness is born on college campuses. This is not a new phenomenon. There have been people fighting the anti-speech, anti-thought, anti-intellectual left on college campuses like FIRE, that organization, for many years. What we're seeing is it's getting exported now. It's born on college campuses, weaponized in Washington by activists, and then exported across the country. So we have an entire chapter in End of Discussion about academia and going through this this is more of a new sort of nomenclature, lexicon of silencing, where they just fabricate these pseudoscientific sounding terms as an excuse basically to tell people to shut up.
Right.
So one of them is triggering, which is, you can feel it, they want trigger warnings put on curricula. If you're going to read a book that might have something to do with race that would make people feel uncomfortable, students would have to be warned in advance that this was happening because you might get triggered by something. You can opt out of certain lessons or reading certain books.
Reading To Kill a Mockingbird basically requires a massage therapist in the room.
Yes.
Like you can't go there without some sort of comfort.
It's very triggering to even hear you say that. It's actually you joking about triggering is triggering. So I'd appreciate it if you left me in my own safe space.
Well, I'm annoyed that you're mansplaining it to me.
See, this is how it goes, and we go round and round. Safe space is another big one, where people have to feel safe in their learning environment, which does not mean like there's not going to be a mugging, which we all agree should be. It's a worthy goal. Let's not get students mugged. No, they don't want to be intellectually mugged by ideas that are, a little hurtful or a little uncomfortable for these little snowflakes. And that's, we think, sort of the opposite of what a robust intellectual environment ought to be like at, for example, a college. Another one is, microaggressions. Again, this all sounds very official, right? Microaggressions. Microaggressions basically means anything that might offend anyone for any reason. And there's this academic that we cite in the book who's sort of the godfather of microaggressions. And he actually describes it.
What a title.
Yeah.
What an honor.
It's right on your business card. He describes microaggressions as insults and slights so subtle sometimes that neither party fully understands what's going on. So be on the lookout for that.
Yes.
And then, of course, there's privilege, which is a big one.
Yes.
Privilege.
And one of the fun college activities that kids do these days, I call them kids because they act like kids on college campuses now, but they're actually adults. They do a privilege walk, which is where they all start out on one line, and then if you're, say, white, you step forward. If your parents are still together, you step forward. If you're a minority, you step back. If you went to such and such school, you step back. So that by the end of the exercise, everyone is perfectly divided into their proper social categories so that they can be properly resentful and really truly understand their privilege, which I would argue is not exactly the most unifying orientation activity anyone has ever done. But the deal with privilege, and Guy and I argue, is like, look, self-awareness is great. White men have enjoyed a place of privilege over many years. It's fine to acknowledge that and make that part of our discussions and be respectful to our fellow, students and friends. But not as a weapon to get everyone to shut up. Thank you very much, white man. I think we have heard enough from you. Like, that's what they're really after. But they're only after it for the right of center, are they not?
Yeah, so this is one of our favorite passages of End of Discussion. There are exceptions to all of these rules. That's one thing you have to remember about the left's rules. They are capricious and they are fluid and there are waivers. And I'm so sorry to inform all of you that none of you are eligible for a waiver, and neither are we. The waivers are given to very special people for very ideological reasons. And our favorite instance of this applies to one Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, who, in case you're unfamiliar, is a white chick. She's just a white woman. But she, for 20 years, claimed to be a Native American. So she had grown up in Oklahoma, and she had gone to law school and gone to sort of a lower tier law school, was teaching at some lower tier law schools, and she decided that she wanted to sort of make a career vault into the Ivy Leagues. And so she decided, well, I'm a Native American, and started checking the box when she was applying, when she was applying for jobs, Native American. And lo and behold, she got hired at Penn, and then Harvard. And then she got tenure at Harvard Law, at which point she stopped checking the Native American box. So this became a bit of an issue, because this is the opposite of privilege. The way the left thinks about privilege, this is not checking your privilege, this is inventing a privilege for your own personal benefit. And so this
shopping for privileges among the underprivileged.
Right.
Oh, we've set aside these privileges for people who were genuinely historically oppressed. Let me go grab some of those and run to the Ivy League with them. So that was the plan.
So she was running for Senate in Massachusetts, and this became a bit of an issue in the campaign. She won anyway because Massachusetts. But during this campaign, Scott Brown, her opponent, and his supporters were like, so you were checking this box of being a Native American for 20 years. What evidence do you have that you're Native American? And she was like, first of all, how dare you? How dare you insult my family? And they're like, okay, but like, no, seriously, what's your evidence? So she brought out this genealogist who was like, I have looked at the records and I have concluded that Elizabeth Warren is 1/32nd Cherokee. Interesting. Then the Cherokees showed up and they were like, no, no, that's not how you do it, and nope. And so it turned out Elizabeth Warren was 0/32 Cherokee.
The good news is that means Guy and I are Native American commentators, Mary Katharine Ham and Guy Benson.
Yeah. We are equally Cherokee.
0/32 right here.
To Native American. So she was like, all right, forget the lineage stuff. I have more proof. Would you like to give our disclaimer?
Yeah, we do like to give a disclaimer because these are her words, but they make us sound insensitive when we say them. So just keep in mind, these are Elizabeth Warren's words. Darling of the left.
So I was told that I was Native American because my grandfather, my pawpaw, had high cheekbones like all the Indians do. That's a direct quote. And even sort of the liberal media was like, what? So then she's like, okay, now hang on, I got another one.
It gets better.
I got another one. This will show them. She's like, I contributed 2 recipes to a Native American cookbook. I swear to God this is true, called Pow Wow Chow. And therefore, what more proof do you need? So people examined that Pow Wow Chow was a thing. She had, in fact, contributed some recipes.
Yes.
But people got a little suspicious and ended up doing a bit of Googling, and it looks very much like at least one of the recipes was plagiarized from a New York Times published cookbook. And I thought perhaps the tip-off that this may not have been a long-standing family recipe was that the key ingredient in this dish was fresh crab meat, which we thought may not have been in plentiful supply in 19th century Oklahoma.
It's the little-known prairie crab.
Yes.
It's very long legs to stay above the grass. That's why it's so sought after.
So here's a woman who, as Mary Katharine likes to say, absconded with someone else's privilege to her own great career benefit.
Right.
This would be a high crime of privilege. This is triggering in every possible. I mean, this is a macro aggression. This is not even a micro aggression. This is a macro, full-on aggression, senator. But it didn't matter because she thinks the right way on most things, and therefore waiver, and we're done. Which is, I think, the proof of the point we're making in this section of end of discussion. All of these terms, which are constructed in the service of sensitivity and kindness, are really methods of shutting certain people up. While other people, it just doesn't apply.
Feel free, Elizabeth Warren, to remain atop the pyramid of liberal darlings, which she does, for the very crowd that cares about privilege more than anyone. She is their person. And that is the illustration of how different the standards are for them and for us.
And then, so this whole idea of, really what it comes down to more than anything, fake outrage is sort of the weapon that they use and they deploy all the time. The underlying point, the underlying strategy is to impugn the motives of other people. To say, you believe X that I don't like, and therefore I'm going to think of the worst possible reason you might believe that, attribute that to you, force you back on the defensive, and give a wink to all these other people saying, see, that's a bad person. We will now stop listening to them. We will now not engage with them because they are beyond the pale, period. And I think that ground zero of this type of strategy, this particular effort and campaign that's underway is currently in America this tension between gay rights and religious liberties. I think this is really where the fight is hottest at the moment.
Yeah, and one of the reasons we decided to get off our butts and write a book was the Brendan Eich incident at Mozilla. Brendan Eich was the co-founder of a technology company, a very big technology company, makes Firefox browser. He rose to the top of this company, and upon becoming the head of the company, someone discovered that he had, gasp, given $1,000 to Proposition 8 in California, which was a pro-traditional marriage proposition in 2008. It won in the same year that Barack Obama won True Blue California. You'll remember it's not a super conservative state. He also was pro-traditional marriage at the time. So this was not an outside the mainstream opinion. Guy and I happen to be both pro same-sex marriage. We have polite disagreements with our friends and colleagues all the time. And it is a productive conversation because we do not assume that everyone who disagrees with us is a bigot. That is the first step in talking to people. But not so with the left, who decided that Brendan Eich, not for the way he treated his colleagues or his employees, but for this thought crime, should be tossed out of the company that he founded. And they succeeded. They asked him to repent his views, and he said, no thanks. Good on him. And he was out of the company. And we thought, that is pretty scary. If you cannot hold a mainstream political position in America that the left doesn't like, and also hold your job, you ain't actually free to speak about anything.
And there was one of the other executives at the company who was gay, sort of stood up to the mob and was like, whoa, guys, I agree with you on gay marriage. I disagree with Brendan on gay marriage, and I'm disappointed that he gave the donation that he did to Proposition 8, but I've known him for years. He's a great colleague, he's a terrific leader, and he has never shown one scintilla of discrimination or hatred of any sort towards me or any gay people. Like, think about his entire record, to which the mob said, doesn't matter. His conduct, his behavior, what's in his heart doesn't matter. What matters is what's in his head if it goes against the orthodoxy of the day. And keep in mind, he made this donation and voted the way he did in 2008, as Mary Katharine said, in California, in the year that the president was elected running as a pro-traditional marriage candidate, right? And they were all for traditional marriage at that time. But because the rules are fluid and capricious, and there are waivers, Brendan Eich doesn't get a waiver, Barack Obama, waiver.
Yes.
Of course, Barack Obama was for gay marriage before he was against it, before he was for it again. That's a whole other story that is conveniently described in detail in End of Discussion. So just to whet your appetite for that a little bit. But we really do think that this is, because the new area, the new terrain that this fight is occurring on and sort of these skirmishes are happening is now not so much, well, especially with the Supreme Court doing what they've done, it's not so much about gay marriage, it's now what does that mean for citizens who don't agree with gay marriage, right? So one of the things that we find interesting as we've watched the trajectory of this debate on same-sex marriage in America, one of the ways that the gay rights movement, I think, really changed a lot of hearts and minds and made massive gains in public sentiment, and it's indisputable when you look at the data, right, the polling data, not just among young people where it's overwhelming, but really across the board. The argument that they advanced was, look, it was sort of appealing to Americans' sense of libertarianism and fairness. Like, okay, live and let live, right? Our marriage won't affect your marriage, or our love won't affect you, just relax. And as more people got to know people in their families and colleagues and friends who were gay, you just saw a bit of a sea change. And we think these were positive developments. What has alarmed us is it seemed like the moment that public opinion flipped, where the political high ground was then occupied by the pro-gay marriage folks, live and let live was dead.
It's no, live and let, no, oh no, we're going to crush your bakery into dust.
Right.
That is the new rule.
Right. It went from our love doesn't affect you to celebrate us or else. And we were like, whoa, hang on. we did not sign up for this part of the program. When did this all start happening? And so we really do spend a great amount of this chapter, chapter 8, entitled Bake Me a Cake, Bigots. Sort of, pulling back and forth on this because, again, even going back to 2008, Proposition 8 in California, the slogan against Proposition 8 that the left used was no hate, letter H, number 8, Proposition 8.
Because that's trendy.
Well, and it's clever, I get why they use it, but like implicit in that slogan is if you are for Proposition 8, it is because you have hatred in your heart for gay people. And so I happen to be gay myself. I have people very, very close to me in my family who don't agree with gay marriage. And I know that they love me unconditionally.
That's impossible, guy.
And so we're just trying to bring a little bit of sanity into this discussion and say, maybe we can actually talk to each other, and perhaps we can say, all right, gay marriage is now legal. Let's treat gay people with dignity. Let's think about why the public opinion trend has been so stark. And on the other hand, let's not go around finding small businesses to destroy through lawsuits because we are now telling Catholic florists that they must participate in same-sex weddings.
Well, if the nuns got to buy birth control, the Catholic florists got to
Well, that's the thing. And one of the illustrations we give is, especially, I saw several of these in Durham. The left loves their coexist bumper stickers. You know these, the coexist bumper stickers, right? Where they're basically, you put one on your car and you drive around with that smug smile, like, attention fellow motorists, I'm a good person.
That's right.
Coexist. And then you're like, oh, hey, cool, coexist. What would coexistence look like in America today? Dear coexist person, do you think that, let's say, a devout Muslim caterer should have to participate in a gay wedding that's against their religion?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, they get a little freaked out when you give the Muslim example. They're like, the gays are the Muslims, who wins, who's on the totem pole. They're not really sure, like which one. So you're like, all right,
let me out my guidebook.
You're like, all right, let me make it easier. Should an evangelical Christian be forced? Like, absolutely, or sue the pants off of them. We're like, see, scrape that coexist bumper sticker off your car, please, because you don't believe in coexistence. You don't believe in coexistence. You want everyone to coexist with you the way that you want them to coexist. But when it comes to actually peaceably coexisting with fellow citizens, you actually don't want to live that out in your own life. And so part of what we get into in end of discussion is sort of holding the mirror up to the left on their own slogans and their own self-conception, and asking them in a pleasant sort of way, like, hey, do you guys really believe the things that you spout? When it's harder for you to actually live up to your values. And that's one way that we think it's useful to approach these questions.
Well, and there's two parts of our subhead on the book about our subtitle about making America less free and less fun. So those are the ways that in a really serious way, these outrages for Brendan Eich and for people, much less prominent people who lose their jobs for posting something on Facebook, that makes America less free for them. It also makes America less fun. And this is the part where you can attract people who don't already believe what we believe, right? So on college campuses in particular, these people fancy themselves radicals, but they are Puritans. They cannot handle mainstream movies like American Sniper being shown. They cannot handle Condoleezza Rice, former Secretary of State, coming to speak at their events. They cannot handle comedians telling jokes on college campuses. College campuses, which ironically birthed the free speech movement, if you'll remember, of the late 60s, but so much for that. And sometimes I think as conservatives, we often think, oh, why can't Americans be exercised about the right things, like the Iran deal? I think that's a perfectly valid point. And also, what Americans get really ticked off about is having their entertainment choices limited. That is important to them, and the left is the one taking them away. They hear that it's us taking the fun away from them, but that's not actually what's happening.
They're robbing us of laughter, right? Like, that's what they're doing, and it's not fun. And that's really why we did a whole chapter on the war on comedy, The chapter is entitled The Uptight Citizens Brigade, which is a play on what was a popular comedy show, which really pushed boundaries. And we have a great interview with Adam Carolla in the chapter. We have some great quotes. And then as the book was being published, Jerry Seinfeld came out and said, I'm not going to go on college campuses anymore because of, and we're just like, oh, thank you, Jerry Seinfeld. The timing is like, that's gold, Jerry, gold. Gold. So we appreciated that, and it has continued. I think my favorite thing of the Seinfeld episode was the Huffington Post published a column by a student at the University of San Diego who was very upset with Jerry Seinfeld for saying what he had said.
Disappointed, I think.
Disappointed. So he decided to write an op-ed explaining a thing or two about comedy to Jerry Seinfeld. Like, okay, Blake, explain away.
He was an upperclassman guy.
Yeah, so he knows. And he kept referring to himself as a learner. He's like, my duty as a learner is to, be sensitive to people's whatever. But then he said, look, bottom line, Jerry Seinfeld seems to think that I don't want to be offended and I don't want to be provoked. And he could not be more wrong. I invite him to University of San Diego. Come at me, bro. Provoke me. Offend me. But here are the topics on which you may not provoke or offend me. And he just proceeded to list things. And then he said, these things cannot be allowed to exist in comedy anymore. Period.
And comedians, none of whom are terribly right of center, to their credit, have realized if we can't experiment with words on stage because every single 20-something is sitting there with an iPhone ready to be heinously offended and want me to lose my job, then we can't do our jobs. And the predictable response to Jerry Seinfeld from the left was, aren't you a rich white guy? I think we've heard enough from you, Jerry Seinfeld. But here's the thing, Jerry Seinfeld is not speaking for him. He's not the one who's at risk. He has 79,000 cars that he'll go back to. If he says the wrong joke and someone comes after him, he's got plenty of cushion. He'll be safe. The people who are not are those coming up in comedy, who maybe are one joke away from losing their livelihood and losing their rent. Those people who don't go into entertainment or comedy because they think, oh, well, it's just too fraught with alarmism and with outrage, and this is no fun. And so they decide not to do that. So he's actually speaking for people who are hurt more by this. And that's what really concerned us and why we ended up writing End of Discussion, is because you see this trickling down to normal people every day. I mentioned Facebook posts. A Miami principal, after the McKinney pool party video, which was this conflict between the high school kids having a pool party and the cops. There was video of it, went viral. The principal at this school put on the Miami Herald Facebook page a comment that just sided with the cop. There was nothing vulgar about it. There was nothing racist about it. He lost his job. He lost his job for having the wrong opinion and posting it on his private Facebook, under his personal name. There's another guy, I believe, who lost a job, I think as a fireman, for having a picture on his Facebook page during the Confederate flag outrage from like 3 years ago, where he was wearing swim trunks with a Confederate flag on them. Like, this is not America. This is thought policing. This is bizarre neighbors snitching on neighbors. And it's really damaging to normal people. And it happens so often that even while we were on the road covering this stuff and pitching a book, we always say, paradoxically, the fact that there's a story like this every day is great for the book and terrible for America. But that's something to keep in mind while you're reading this, is like, this happens to innocent people every day, and often we're not even aware of it.
And raise your hand real quick. How many of you guys have played, or heard of at least, a game called Cards Against Humanity? Okay. So I'm sensing a generational gap on that one. So, trigger warning, I'm going to explain Cards Against Humanity.
All the interns are like, right here.
It is a really fun game to play with friends, especially when you're, like I am, drinking for 3. So basically there's a huge deck of cards, and on the cards are written unbelievably offensive things. Really offensive things about all sorts of different groups. Many Holocaust jokes. Okay, like I think eating babies might be one of them.
There are purposely awful.
Which
That's
is
the
actually,
point.
contrary to popular belief, eating babies is not actually the slogan of Planned Parenthood.
He said it.
My words. Is that microaggression? Anyway, so the point is, you play this game, and there's a central card, and then you have your deck of offensive cards, and you have to figure out which of your offensive cards would make the center offensive card even more offensive. Like, what's the most possibly offensive combination you can come up with? And then basically the goal is to get the ooh reaction that you all just gave me, and then whoever gets the biggest ooh or laugh wins the round, basically, right? So that's Cards Against Humanity. And every single group of humans on the planet is targeted somehow in this game. And the idea is we're all going to laugh at each other and at ourselves and be totally irreverent. There was a high school student in Massachusetts, I believe, who's a transgender person. And one of the cards in Cards Against Humanity, the card says, passable transvestite. Okay, like, kind of offensive, but that's the point. And he did a little YouTube video of being very upset and burning the card and saying, you know, this
will not stand.
This will not stand. This is terrible. This is offensive. This is transphobic. And the Cards Against Humanity people were like, oh, yeah, we're sorry. That is offensive. We're going to take it out of the game. We're removing this card. Sorry.
Again, the point of the game is to offend everyone.
Right. But this type of offense, they were like, ooh, recoiled, took it out, banned it from their game. And there were like 2 points that we make when we talk about it in the book. Point one, if you're going to start censoring cards based on people getting offended, the game is over. The entire deck is banned. Like, I'm sorry, passable transvestite is more offensive than genocide jokes? Like, how does that work in your moral calculus? It doesn't. It's crazy. And then the other point is, the name of the game is Cards Against Humanity, where we all rip on each other, but we're taking this one subclass of humanity and literally removing them from the deck of humanity and saying they're in some other place. They are no longer part of humanity. They are apart. They are other. And we're like, there's something sick about that. There's something not okay about that. And again, this comes back, it is stealing fun. This political correctness.
Your drinking game cannot stand.
It's true. It's sort of like there's going to be like, I don't know, like black market copies of this game, right? Just like speakeasies where you can still play Cards Against Humanity. Yes. You need to know the secret code and they'll let you in, and the PC police raid, the SWAT teams come in and you all get frog marched away and thrown in prison or something. We're not there yet, but rhetorically speaking, like, this is part of the war on fun and laughter that we think is a way to reach people who aren't reflexively going to, watch the video. They might watch the video that I thought was very impressive, the Locke Foundation, and be like, I have no idea who any of those people are. Meese? Who the hell is Meese? He looks old. He must not matter. There's a lot of people who are just low information, don't really care, and so talking about American freedom is being eroded, they're like, all right, that's what right-wingers talk about. Yeah. Like, we're right. It's really important. But if you talk instead about, hey, they're trying to ruin Cards Against Humanity, and they're trying to censor comedians, they'll be like, what?
What?
Like, you will not stand between America and stupid comedy. And
it's true.
And so that's one of the reasons, one of the tools we use in the book to try to bring in a different audience.
And one last point, we'll take some questions. It has been encouraging to watch comedians stand up for free speech. And among the targeted recently has been Amy Schumer, who until about 2 weeks ago this is how quickly they turn, right? Until recently was the darling of the left. She was a feminist comedian. She does some hackneyed bits about everything that feminists care about. Sometimes it's very clever, but not all the time. And she recently, despite being a hero of the left, someone decided that she had a blind spot on race. That her jokes had some problematic things in them. And so she became a national story for a couple weeks about how racist Amy Schumer must be. Because if you don't believe everything that a race and gender in the media professor at Wellesley believes, and speak exactly like that person, because that'd be hilarious, then you must be racist or sexist. And the culmination of this campaign against Amy Schumer was a piece in the Washington Post, which should be a free speech organization, but is not, by two academics claiming that the kind of comedy that Amy Schumer does inspired the Charleston shooting. Because jokes lead to mass murder. End of story. That's a compelling argument. And this is not the first time the Washington Post has done this. In the wake of the Santa Barbara shooting with that young man who was quite clearly misogynist and did the YouTube manifesto about why he went and shot up his college campus. This was maybe 2 years ago. The Washington Post ran a column blaming bro comedies starring Seth Rogen and directed by Judd Apatow, such as Neighbors, for inspiring these kind of shootings. Equating jokes and mass shootings by psychopaths is not a free speech argument, Washington Post. And it's a dangerous road to go down. So I'm glad to see not just us, but people who are left of center and who are part of the entertainment industry holding this up and saying, we can't do this anymore, guys.
Well, and that's one of the big things, the last point I'll make. We wrote End of Discussion with a couple goals in mind. Right near the top was, we cannot just complain amongst ourselves about this problem, right? Yes, fake outrage is a problem, but if we write this outraged book about outrage, that might be counterproductive. And just coming into rooms full of fellow conservatives who already agree with this and being this, this is a problem, is great. It might sell some books, but ultimately we really wanted to have the book be accessible to people who don't necessarily agree with us. And so one of my good friends, very liberal, well-read, smart guy, we came to him early on in the process when we had an early manuscript. We said, John, would you do us a favor? Would you read our manuscript and don't tell us why we're wrong politically about whatever the issue might be. We want to know, are there any really big, so almost embarrassing, ideological blind spots that we have? Because we want to be fair to your side. Of course we're conservatives. We're going to write this from a center-right perspective. We're not going to back away from that, but we want to be fair so that someone like you might pick up the book and not immediately have to put it down because it's too much of a partisan screed. We want to be credible. So he came back, he read the whole thing, and we thank him in the acknowledgments for doing it. And he said, look, I think the book is really well written, it's fun, I actually agree with most of your thesis here. Here are 6 recommendations that I have that would make it, I think, a little bit more fair to our side. And we looked at them and we said, you know what? These are legit. And so we incorporated all 6 of them. We really want this book to be accessible to people who don't agree with us. And another big way that we tried to do that was make the book fun to read and even funny to read, which is tough when you're dealing with such a serious topic. But we realized this really angry book about this would be a joyless slog to write and a joyless slog to read. And look, if you're into joyless slogs, that's your business. May I recommend the Hillary Clinton presidential campaign, for instance? But we did not want to be in the business of writing 300 pages of just anger and venting frustration, because we do a lot. We don't need more pounding of the desks. We need more linking of arms of saying, even if you disagree with our worldview, free expression, free exchange, free thought, critical thinking, this matters to all of us as Americans.
In other words, you should totally buy 2 books and hand one to your sister-in-law.
Oh, that is such a good idea.
Who is savable, who's still out there in the center, flailing about for something. But seriously, we do think it's a book you can hand to relatives and friends and say, and we've pitched to people, hand it to them and say, hey, you think of yourself as very open-minded, give this book a chance, and give me a book that I can read, and then we can talk about it. And in that way, we hope our book starts more discussions than it ends. And with that, I think we'll take some questions, and we will also be signing books while you're buying your several copies outside.
In fact,
Thanks, guys.
Here's the microphone. If you'd like to ask a question, please come to the microphone. And also, we do have a few more books that are for sale outside when we finish, and Guy and Mary Catherine will be there to sign.
A lot of people seem to think that Donald Trump's rise in the polls about twice of anybody else is in part because he doesn't appear to be afraid of offending anyone. Do you think he is maybe making some type of contribution to hopefully reverse the trend that you folks are talking about here?
Do you want to start this one?
Why don't you start this
So
one?
I think one, yes, he does not care. And that is what people respond to about him. And I think that the support for him does not come from nothing. And a lot of it comes from frustration and venting about the fact that everyone feels like, oh, we have to say everything in these super couched ways, and we can't be honest about what's actually happening in the country. That being said, I think that role might be better for public commentators and being bolder in their speech than it might be for the guy who we are choosing to literally represent the party. I think that's the disconnect there. When you're picking somebody who should be the president, he should be able, and here's the thing, Guy and I in the book are not pro-rudeness for the sake of rudeness, right? Like many Southerners in this room, I think, who would agree that that's not what we're striving for. We do want to put on our big boy and girl pants and be able to take it when someone disagrees with us. But I do think rudeness for the sake of rudeness is not the goal. And in fact, what you can do, I think sometimes by being, when you go too far, is that you end up, as Greg Gutfeld put it quite eloquently the other day on Twitter, that you end up embodying everything that the good parts of the politically correct movement were trying to prevent. You embody that in an effort to fight the politically correct movement. And I think that's the wrong way to go, because you're not gathering people to join you in that fight. You're making them angry.
You're empowering them in some ways. And so
they go, see, this is what they're like.
And because people have challenged us on the Trump stuff, like, you guys wrote a whole book about this, but you're very, very critical of Donald Trump. And I was like, yes, because as we argue explicitly in End of Discussion, having contempt and disdain for the weaponized, politically correct armies does not necessitate an abandonment of decency or manners. And that is how I feel about Donald Trump. I think that he is ill-mannered and indecent. And that's the thing. We can have disagreements with Donald Trump. I could sit here and tell you all about the things that Donald Trump has said and thought politically over many years with which I disagree. For example, supporting the Obama stimulus, or single-payer health care, or bashing the Koch brothers last week, or opposing Citizens United. The list goes on. And we can have a discussion, or I would like to have a discussion. The problem with Donald Trump, say, hey, Donald, you said this, though, and he would say, shut up, you're a loser, you're pathetic, you're a slob. He is
2 out of 3 ain't bad, guy.
That's exactly right. So pro-manners, anti-rudeness, also anti-political correctness. It's not an incoherent philosophy.
Hi, thank you that was a fun way to have the talk. Thank you for that. So I'm new at being sort of a conservative activist.
Welcome.
And thank you, trying very hard. So my tiptoe into it was at my son's college, the College of Charleston, where his freshman year, their chosen reading was Fun Home. Oh. And I hear it's to be Duke's freshman reading this fall. Did you hear that?
I would not be at all surprised.
Yeah. So in just trying to understand, I went on their listserv for the parents and said, well, how is this book chosen? I got, well, why don't we burn all the books that you disapprove of? How dare you speak up for this? I mean, who do you think you are? And, we need to ban people. I asked how it was. So I'm not savvy enough now to fight that. I had a meeting with the provost, and my son was like, shut up, Mom, they're going to target me. And so there are all sorts of reasons that shut you down. And they were like, well, if your son has ever felt like his professors target him, let us know. I was like, well, how would he know? Yeah. So I'm sorry to talk so long, but comment on that. How do we take a correct stand to just say, let's have some balance, okay? Right. You chose this. I'm not wanting to shut you down, but I want to have a discussion about how we balance it. It is a state school. Most people don't realize Charleston is a state school.
Well, you just asked a question. Like, I'm not talking about burning books on a bonfire. I asked one question, right, which was, are questions not allowed? Right. And that's the thing. Are questions not allowed? Point one. Another point that you might make in that situation when they said you just want to ban books. Interestingly, the people who have that reaction are adamantly opposed, like Donald Trump, to the Citizens United free speech decision by the Supreme Court, which was a win for free expression and political speech. The left, Hillary Clinton said she does have a litmus test for her Supreme Court justices if she's president, which is that they would overturn Citizens United. And
because the First Amendment.
In Citizens United, the government actually argued that the government should be able to ban books if they are paid for by corporate money.
It was an actual exchange between a Supreme Court justice and the government's lawyer, and all of the Supreme Court justices, including the leftist center ones, were like, whoa, dude.
Yeah, no, the leftist justices were like, he didn't mean that. That's not what he meant. So there's one side, like the left had this whole thing that Sarah Palin tried to ban books in Wasilla, which was absolutely false. They just made it up. There's one side that actually wants to ban books in America, and it's not ours. And I think in a cheerful way, sometimes pointing out the hypocrisies or asking more questions is one way to go about it.
And the other thing is college campuses are just going to be tough. Like going off to college and having different beliefs is going to be hard unless you are going to Hillsdale or a handful of other colleges that happen to be right of center. Guy and I both went to University of Georgia, which you would not think is terribly liberal, but any college. I mean, that's the thing. Even University of Georgia, you're surrounded by liberals. And so I think it does, if you're strong enough in your beliefs to begin with, to remain strong, it has a way of really honing your arguments and making you prepared to fight for what you believe. It should not be that every conservative student must do that all the time, and it's very intimidating, and it's really hard. In fact, some of the stands that I took were after I knew I had all the credits I needed to graduate. Now I will bravely stand up for my beliefs, Professor. But also, with someone like your son or someone who is brave enough to stand up, you can be the person that brings, and I know you were talking to me about this earlier, that brings conservatives out of the woodwork who you didn't know were there. And that's part of speaking our minds and being truthful and not being afraid, is that if you're afraid and only one person speaks up and gets shouted down and becomes a victim, then the next person is scared. But if we all do it together and distribute the risk, it becomes less scary. And so your son or somebody else's kid who's brave enough to do that can be that person. And when you make that stand, Guy and I have experienced it many times in liberal cities and liberal communities on college campuses where someone comes up to us afterwards and says, "Thank you for saying that." And we say, "You don't have to whisper." So it's not a happy answer. It's going to be tough out there, almost no matter where you are, but you can make it better.
And by the way, your question reminded me very quickly of a story that happened to me in undergrad. So I went to Northwestern's journalism school, and my senior year, we all had these cubby holes, these little mailboxes, and I went up to check mine for the first time in a long time, and there, sitting in every student in the journalism school's mailbox, was a copy of a book called What Liberal Media by Eric Alterman, who is a Media Matters far-left person debunking the idea that there's a liberal media in every cubbyhole. So I took mine and I marched into the dean's office and I said, hey, I just found this in my mailbox. I see it's in everyone's mailbox. How did this come about? They're like, oh, well, a donor thought it was important that all the journalism students have this. I'm like, really? Who was that donor? He said, oh, it was Ralph Nader. And so I said, let's think about this together. This is a liberal book written by a liberal that reinforces a liberal talking point, literally paid for by a prominent liberal, and just distributed to every student in the journalism program with no, like, can I go find a conservative donor and get Bernie Goldberg's bias and put it in every, is that? And he was just like,
that's crazy talk, guy. That's crazy talk.
I don't know. That's hypothetical, all this stuff. And so there really is a big blind spot. Colleges, we could have done a whole book on just that issue, but we wanted to branch out a little bit.
Also, it's helpful to point out to them, like, we actually, I don't always object to liberal books being in classrooms, right? I would like to add books, right, not subtract them. More speech, not less. That's our position. Theirs is actually just removing speech.
Okay, so 2 comments. First one, considering Citizens United was about a movie about Hillary, shouldn't she recuse herself? But actually, the serious comment, and I've only been able to get through half your book, so I don't know if this made it in there, and I don't think it did because it was so recent. But kind of in the realm of what happened to you, 2 gay hoteliers, Maddie Wiederpass and Ian Reisner, were pilloried and had their hotels boycotted simply for having Ted Cruz over for dinner to see if there was common ground that they could come up to. So merely
the
engaging
ultimate sin.
the other side. So
so they had Ted Cruz over for dinner. They talked about foreign policy mostly because they're sort of hawkish pro-Israel. They did talk about gay rights and had a disagreement, and word got out that they had dined with the enemy, and there was a massive boycott against their hotel. In fact, an AIDS charity gala was canceled at their hotel because priorities, guys, right? We're going to cancel the AIDS charity to punish you for having dinner with someone that we don't like.
Send AIDS patients medicine or send Ted Cruz a message?
Right. Right?
I think we know what wins that battle.
It's a tough one. And the standard is don't talk to people that disagree with you. This is the opposite of the open and free exchange of ideas. And by the way, one of these guys, this goes to our point, one of the 2 guys prostrated himself before the gay community and said, I am so sorry, I didn't know, I'm going to give my donation back, I had no idea what Ted Cruz was for on this stuff, which is absolute garbage. Sorry, mea culpa, and they said, apology not accepted, we're going to destroy you anyway. They hired a plane to fly over one of his properties with a banner, shame on, self-loathing, blah, like, they went after him anyway. The other guy stood up for himself a little bit more. There's a follow-up to the story. He was on vacation this summer, around July 4th, on Fire Island, which is sort of this gay place, and he was at a bar with his companion, I don't know who he's with. Someone recognized him at the bar, started pointing out who he was while he's on vacation. This guy had dinner with Ted Cruz, and they ended up hounding him out of an eating establishment. Like, you can't even, we will not be in the presence of you because you were in the presence of someone else. Like, no one can have dinner with anyone anymore. Get out. End of discussion. That is literally what it's about. And that, if that story had happened while we were writing the book, would absolutely be in it. It was very upsetting, especially to me.
It's really great to hear this forum here, and I arrived late, so you might have covered this, but in regard to the nice lady whose son is at College of Charleston and what she ran up against, I'd like to get your opinion on what I'm about to suggest here for everybody, and that is they should read and become thoroughly familiar with Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, because that's what we're all up against.
Yeah.
We do have an Alinsky reference. Actually, one of our chapter titles is about some of the double standards. This is not an anti-media book. There have been plenty of good books written that are critiques of the media. But there was one chapter in particular where we go after the media and some of their double standards. And the title of the chapter is Different Rules for Radicals. Because it goes back to our point about how there are different sets of rules. And one example that we give that's probably the most galling is, you all recall a few years ago when Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords was shot by that lunatic, the young schizophrenic young man. And immediately the left said, the Tea Party, Sarah Palin, conservative rhetoric is responsible for that shooting. And they were all upset about Sarah Palin because she had a map of congressional targets that her PAC was targeting, and because there was a target on her district, that is why this happened. Shame on her. Rhetoric is responsible.
It turned out, of course, that he was schizophrenic. The shooting was not politically motivated. He had one of these weird fixations on Gabrielle Giffords. Had nothing to do with Sarah Palin whatsoever. On the other hand, there was the shooting at the Family Research Council, which was so little covered that unless you're a conservative activist, you probably don't know about it. But a man a 28-year-old man who works for some LGBT groups. Is he gay himself too? I don't know. I remember. He's a gay activist. Went to FRC one day, planned this event, and tried to shoot up a bunch of people at FRC. He was heroically stopped by the security guard, who ended up getting shot in the arm, but was able to stop the guy. In a cartoonish sort of illustration of how politically motivated this was, he packed his bag not only with ammo, but with Chick-fil-A sandwiches. Because it was in the wake of finding out that, gasp, people who own Chick-fil-A believe different things than some of the country on gay marriage. And his plan, as he said, outright in the wake of this, was to smash Chick-fil-A sandwiches into the faces of his victims at the Family Research Council because he believed that they hated gay people, and that was why he wanted to go shoot them.
And he had found them on a map that was published by a left-wing group called the Southern Poverty Law Center, where they had a list of hate groups, and Family Research Council was on their hate group map, and he openly said, I chose this organization to target because of the hate group map. So exactly what they pretended the Tucson thing was about, which wasn't true, was true of this shooting over here, and it got very little news coverage. It happened, by the way, a few weeks before the presidential election. So imagine if the roles had been reversed. Would we have had a national conversation about that one?
Yeah.
You think?
I think so.
But it was just like radio silence, media barely covered it, the White House did a quick denunciation of it. And
it also happened less than a mile from the White House.
It was right there. And then, like cherry on top of this Sunday, just a few months later, the New York Times did a story that mentioned the Family Research Council, that quoted an official from the Southern Poverty Law Center condemning Family Research Council with absolutely no mention of the shooting whatsoever, which is as if the New York Times had written a story about quoting Sarah Palin about Gabby Giffords and just didn't mention the shooting, even though there was no relevance, no evidence on this side, all the evidence in the world on this side. That is what we're up against. That is the darkest chapter of our book. It was hard to make that. That's not light reading.
No, just because it'll appeal to this crowd in particular, the entire Moral Mondays push and the Wisconsin stuff and anywhere else you see this proliferate around the country is based on civil disobedience, right? It's based on going places you're not allowed to go, obstructing people in traffic, occupying things, getting arrested. Sometimes there's defecating on cop cars, what have you, depending on the movement. As I say, the nice protesters in Wisconsin, just ended up making the Capitol look like an episode of Hoarders. It's very bad news. And the thing that is so galling for me and for all of us is that the idea that we would be allowed any civil disobedience at a Tea Party rally, for instance, a misspelled sign is reason enough to throw you out. And by the way, in many states, it came to pass later that people found out that the Occupy movement had stayed in these public parks and public lands and ruined them for 3 months because they're left of center and they're allowed to do that kind of thing. Whereas the Tea Party had paid tens of thousands of dollars for permits, police protection, sanitation, and left the places better than they had looked before. Their speech is literally freer than ours. And that is a problem.
Guy Benson and Mary Katharine Ham. I know everyone agrees with me. Sorry to say it's the end of today's discussion.
Thank you.
We want to thank you both very much. And folks, a reminder, they will be outside to sign copies of End of Discussion. I hear there are still some copies available for purchase at the desk outside. Thank you for coming, everyone. We'll see you at the next John Locke Foundation event. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.